This is a brand new Ferrari 812 Superfast. Yes, that's right, Superfast is the actual name of this car, even though it sounds like the kind of thing a child would say with a Hot Wheels toy. Look, mommy, this one is super fast. But when you look at the numbers, it starts to make sense. This car has 789 horsepower. It does 0 to 60 in 2.7 seconds, and it'll hit 211 miles an hour. It is indeed super fast. And today, I'm going to show you around it. First, a little overview. Now, if you know Ferrari, you know they have 4 basic product lines with the occasional supercar peppered in periodically. There's the entry-level model, that's the California, which is soon to be renamed the Portofino. There's the mid-engine sports car, which is currently the 488. There's the 4-seater, that's currently the GT4 Lusso. And then there's this, the 2-seater V12, which traces its lineage back to some of the most significant and valuable models in Ferrari's history. But the 812 Superfast is undoubtedly the most impressive V12 2-seater Ferrari in the brand's history, at least in terms of performance. Yes, 789 horsepower from its 6.5-liter V12. That's 60 more horsepower than the F12 that it replaces. It also has 530 pound-feet of torque. It'll do the quarter mile in the mid-10-second range, and it has a 7-speed dual-clutch automatic transmission. This car is a monster in every sense of the word. And that includes price. The base price of this car is around $335,000, but that's before options, which are plentiful and expensive. It is totally within the realm of possibility for a sticker price on one of these fully optioned to be over $450,000. So the stage is set. Incredible numbers, incredible performance, incredible price. And so today I'm going to take you on a tour of the 812 Superfast, which, by the way, I've borrowed from a viewer here in the Los Angeles area. I'm going to show you all of the interesting quirks and cool features of Ferrari's current flagship car. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the 812 Superfast, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also compiled a list of my favorite V12 Ferrari models currently listed for sale on AutoTrader. I'm going to start the quirks and features up front with the front turn signal, which in this car is very cool. It's 6 little dots of orange light arranged in 3 pairs of 2. So when you put on the turn signal, it looks like 3 different angry animals with their little eyes every time the turn signal blinks. Now the lighting is also pretty cool in the back. Not on the brake lights, but on the tail lights, the lights that go on when you turn on the headlights. They have this sort of thin rim of red that lights up in circles in the taillight assembly every time you turn on the headlights, and that is a really cool look. Another thing worth noting in the rear of this car is all the lines back here for style. There are quite a few of them. You can see this line that the spoiler has. Well, then it goes over the brake lights and makes a basically 90-degree turn and becomes a vertical line that goes down to the bottom of the bumper. And it doesn't stop there. There's another line right here under the Ferrari horse that goes across the entire rear end, a line under that that goes above the license plate and then sort of goes down into the bottom of the bumper, and then there's yet another line below the license plate. In the end, there's a lot going on back here. But it isn't just the rear where you notice that. The side of this car also has an enormous number of style lines. Okay, start with this one that runs sort of underneath the window and then into the hood. That's one. Then there's a second one that runs from the rear pillar to the base of the front fender all the way down the door. That's 2. Then you have a third one. It's a little hard to see, but it's right here. And then there's a 4th one at the bottom of the door. You count them all up and there are 4 different contour lines just in the door of this car, which is quite a lot. And the lines continue in front. Now you're looking over the hood, so you can see the 2 large lines that go down the center of the hood, but there's more than that. There's also this body colored piece above the headlights that's set off from the rest of the hood that has a contour of its own. And then there are these pieces right here that probably are for cooling, and they have a line that runs all the way down the side of the car and onto the hood, making this hood into a rather complex piece. It's anything but flat. Now the interesting thing about all these lines in the front, the sides, the rear, actually they don't make the car look as over-styled as you think. Instead, it all just sort of works and the car ends up looking aggressive and mean and cool. It could be trying too hard, but I think it stays just shy of that line. Next up, another item that is surprisingly cool in this car is the fuel filler area over here on the rear fender. You open up the fuel door and look inside, and it's this very nice, almost rotary looking thing with these screws that keep it in there, and then the Ferrari horse on top, just reminding you that you drive a cool car even when you're filling it up with fuel. But what I don't understand are the instructions printed on the inside of the fuel door for how to fill it up. Now, number 1 and 2 I get. You go to the gas pump, you put it in there, and then you squeeze it and fuel starts coming out. But then you move on to number 3. You've inserted the fuel pump into the car and it says no more than 2 automatic chutes. What does that mean? What could that possibly mean? Then you go below that and there's a little clock thing that says 10 seconds, and then number 4, you pull the fuel pump out of the car and you're done. I really don't understand that. First off, it's gonna take more than 10 seconds to fill up this car, and I really don't get what no more than 2 automatic chutes means. Ferrari, if it's okay with you, I think I'm just gonna fill up this car like I fill up every other car. But thanks for the instructions. Next up, let's talk trunk. Now, when you first glance at this car, you probably think the trunk begins right here under the Ferrari logo in back, but in fact it doesn't. You pop the trunk and you discover that it actually starts even further back. There is more trunk than you think. The thing under the Ferrari logo is just another line for style, like all the others in this car. Anyway, you pop it open, and the first thing you discover when you get inside is, well, it's a hatchback. Yes, indeed, the 812 Superfast is a hatchback. It's more practical than you might think, although it's still not incredibly practical. As you can see, it's not exactly huge back there, but the real problem is the incredibly high lip to get stuff in the back. They got to put the Ferrari horse there, the license plate, and so anything you want to lift up, you have to lift basically to your waist in order to get it in here. And so if it's something that's very heavy, that could be a problem. Now, once you get into the cargo area, the first thing you see is this. This is a leather cover, and it's sort of part cargo cover, part trunk. And I say that because in order to access your full cargo area, you have to open this like a trunk. And once you do open it, you have access to the full cargo area, but you also have access to a plaque that gives you all of the special options of your specific 812 Superfast. Obviously, this car has quite a few options. The owner told me the original sticker price is about $413,000. My favorite option, however, is listed as HELE, which stands for High Emotion, Low Emissions. I swear that is an actual option on this plaque. And another interesting item printed inside the trunk is up here. All the way at the top on the inside of the trunk lid, there is a little diagram showing an 812 Superfast with its trunk open. I have no idea why that's there. Maybe so you can have a look at what your 812 Superfast looks like with its trunk open while your 812 Superfast has its trunk open. Makes no sense to me, but there it is. Now, next up, before we leave behind the trunk entirely, I know you probably realize this is a pretty big car, so you might be wondering what's between the cargo area and the seats. Well, as it turns out, it's this nice leather shelf with these beautiful leather straps on it that are placed there in case you want to secure a piece of luggage to the shelf right behind the seats. A lot of the 2-seat V12 Ferraris have had this leather shelf back here for a long time, and this one carries on the tradition. Next, we move under the hood, and I'll give you a second to gaze at this car's glorious and massive 6.5-liter V12. It is absolutely huge. Next, we move on to the interior, where there are quite a few interesting quirks and features. I'm going to start with the climate vents, which protrude very conspicuously from the dashboard. They're these giant circles. Now, the interesting thing about the climate vents is you can move them in any direction. You can move them up, down, any angle. It doesn't matter. You can move them precisely where you want air to come out. The weird thing about them is that you can turn the climate vents like in a circle, but nothing happens when you do. You turn them, it doesn't decrease or increase the airflow, it doesn't change the direction of the air. It just lets you turn it if you want to be playing with a circle thing while you drive down the road. In order to decrease or increase the quantity of air for each vent, there is a little dial next to the vents, like in a normal car, that you can just move and change how much air is coming out. Now, another thing you notice right when you climb in is the headlight switch to the left of the steering wheel, which is a pretty nifty switch, if I may say so. I say that because in order to turn the headlights on manually, you push the switch and then the headlight lights up in green. If you want to go back to auto, push it again and then auto lights up in green. It's a simple simple operation, but it looks cool. There are some other nifty switches throughout this car. For instance, the button to pop the tailgate is on the driver's door panel, and it's the same color as the part of the panel that it's on, and it's just sort of integrated in there so you wouldn't really see it unless you knew to look for it. Same with the button to open the glove box. There's just a little black button that says open on the dashboard with all the other black, and so you wouldn't know it's there unless you knew. I also like the interior door opener in this car, which doesn't really look like an interior door opener. It looks just a little bit cooler. That may seem like something of a gimmick, but I think it adds a little bit of coolness when you're simply trying to get out of your car. And it's the same story with the cup holder. There's only one, but it's pretty cool. It's in the center console, and when there's no drink inside of it, it just sort of continues on the lines from the center console. But put a drink in there, and then those lines kind of fold away to allow the drink to take its place. That is a nice little piece of style and attention to detail. Next up, another really cool interior feature of this car is the steering wheel, which is just awesome. Now, the theory with this steering wheel is they wanted to make sure that everything was basically on it, really close to your fingers. So if you're on a racetrack, you don't have to reach over and grab anything if you want to make an adjustment. And so we start with the turn signals. The turn signals are mounted on the wheel rather than on a stalk shooting off from the steering column like in every other car. And there are two different ways you can operate them. Push the turn signal and it turns on. Or if you're one of these people who has long fingers, they're resting behind the steering wheel, you can push down on the back of the same piece and it also turns on the turn signal, and that is pretty cool. Now, moving down on the left, you can see there's a button with a headlight on it. I already showed you the headlight switch has the auto headlights to the left of the wheel, but if you want to put on your brights, you can do that. Just push that in and your high beams are on, or pull it forward and your high beams flash once. Now, next to the high beams, you have a suspension button. And I know what you're thinking. You push that and it goes into sport suspension. Actually, it's just the opposite. You push that and it puts the car into bumpy road mode. I guess it gives a comfier ride or something. But the coolest part is this little diagram shows up inside your gauge cluster that shows an 812 Superfast on a very bumpy road, which is hilarious to look at. Now, moving over to the right, you have your windshield wipers. Again, not on a stalk coming off the steering column, but they're actually on the steering wheel itself. You have 4 settings, 2 manual settings and 2 auto settings. And then below that, you have the windshield washer squirter thing. Now, below the wipers, you have this little dial which allows you to choose which mode you want to be in. You have wet, sport, race, then there's traction control off and stability control off. I love the fact that Ferrari thinks there's nothing between wet and sport. There's no normal. Basically, the theory is if it's not wet, you're going to be driving in sport mode. Now, the next set of buttons in the middle there below the horn is Bluetooth. You can answer a call or you can press the little voice button and give a voice command. Now, you look at all those buttons and you're probably thinking, well, where's volume or next track for the stereo? They're hidden. They're behind the steering wheel. You reach around back and you can adjust the volume and change the track. Now, that means pretty much everything you could ever want to use when you're driving on the track or on the street is right there at your fingertips on the steering wheel. And of course, that also includes the final button, engine start stop. You press that and the V12 roars to life. But not all of the interior details in this car are cool and well thought out. There are a couple of head scratchers. One of them is on the climate controls. There's a button that allows you to direct where the air is coming, point at the windshield, at your feet, or coming out of the dashboard vents. But you press that button and these little tiny arrows light up to tell you where it's coming out of. And that's the only place in the car where that information is displayed. You have to really focus on exactly which arrow is lit up if you want to see where your air is coming. For older drivers, the kind of people who might be buying a $400,000 Ferrari, that seems like it might be a little bit too small. Now, another interesting and odd placement in this car is the power lock button. It's not located on the door, in the center console, in the dashboard. Instead, it's on the ceiling next to the towing mode button. You have your power locks and your towing mode, one of which you use often and one of which no one even knows what it does. Another interesting item in this particular 812, this car has these tight racing bucket seats and they are manually operated. You pay 400 whatever thousand, you get manual seats, but take a look at them. They are just so cool looking. Not only are they like 3 different colors and they have all this stitching, but they're just contoured perfectly and they're just so cool looking, you forgive the fact that they aren't power seats. Also interesting is how you put this car in gear. Now, there's a little carbon fiber bridge kind of coming from the center console and going up to the center control stack, and it contains reverse and automatic. So you can tell how to put it in reverse and you can tell how to put it in auto mode. Another button there is labeled PS, that's for power start, or what we would call launch control. But how do you put it in drive? There's no drive button there. Well, To get this car into drive, when you first start it up, you just pull the right paddle, the upshift paddle, and that puts it in drive. Now, where's park? How do you put it in park? Pull both paddles at the same time, that puts it in neutral, and then when you turn off the engine, the parking brake goes on, and the car is automatically placed in park. It's actually pretty intuitive, but you gotta know what you're doing the first time you drive a Ferrari. Now, next up we move on to the gauge cluster, which is interesting, partially because it contains two screens. This car does not have a center screen like virtually every other car. Instead, all your information is in the gauge cluster. Now, the screen on the left is controlled with a little wheel to the left, and you can move that wheel and scroll through various different readouts. One is the speedometer, another one shows tire pressure and temperature, and then there are two different pages of gauges that you would have in a normal car. The screen on the right is controlled with a little dial on the right, and this one gives you more options. Specifically, you can scroll through that screen on the right and look at your speedometer, your radio, your media, your navigation, and your phone, all pretty self-explanatory. Now, the last thing on there is settings, and there are some rather unusual settings. One is the little park beep volume, the little parking sensor volume. You can turn that really high. Take a listen. That is incredibly annoying. Now, another interesting item in the settings menu is languages. Scroll down to languages and you can choose between three. There's English, which this car refers to as American, and then next there's what I believe is Korean, and then there's Portuguese. Spanish, because we're near Mexico? No. French, because we're near Canada? No. But if you want Korean and Portuguese, why, yes, you can easily select those languages. Now, because there are two screens in the gauge cluster and no screen in the middle, you're probably thinking that means there's no screen for the passenger, so the passenger can't control the stereo or anything. Well, on the contrary, there is actually a screen specifically for the passenger. Sitting here in the passenger seat, you press the little power button over to the right next to the climate control vent, and that turns on the passenger screen, and you can scroll between several different menus as the passenger. On the media menu, the passenger can look and see what music is playing in the stereo, and even change the track or the radio station, so the passenger doesn't have to ask the driver to make those changes in the gauge cluster screen. The passenger can also look at performance settings and see the current speed, the current gear, and even how many G-forces we're pulling at the current moment, which is pretty cool for those kids on Instagram who take videos from the passenger seat of supercars and want to show how fast it's going. They no longer have to lean over and do it in the gauge cluster. They have their own screen to see that information. Finally, the passenger can even take a look at what mode the car is in, sport, wet, race, and even see exactly which car systems are turned all the way up or all the way down, depending on what mode you're in, and that is also pretty cool. That's a cool screen on the passenger side. Now, finally, we move into the glove box of this car, where there are a couple of interesting details in the owner's manual pouch. I'm going to start with the little insert for the Takata airbag recall. Now, that in itself isn't all that unusual. I think a lot of automakers are putting little inserts in for that. The weird thing is how Ferrari is written in this insert. All the other letters use normal uppercase and lowercase, but for Ferrari, they make the F uppercase, and then the other letters sort of smaller uppercase, and they only do it for Ferrari, just so they can distinguish that word from all the other words. This ridiculousness continues if you go into the owner's manual. You will see that the owner's manual also uses regular uppercase and lowercase letters, but you get to authorized Ferrari dealer, and there it is, printed in their specific Ferrari uppercase font, so that it can be distinguished from things that are not related to the authorized Ferrari dealer. Here's a little hint to anyone out there who's running a business. You know your brand might be a little too full of itself, takes itself a little too seriously, if there's a specific way its name must be written out in the owner's manual literature. Now, speaking of the owner's manual literature, a couple of interesting things in here. One is the transmission fluid. If you want to check your transmission fluid, there's a little spot in the owner's manual where you can go and look and see what to do, and what it says to do is go to your authorized Ferrari dealer. You are not qualified to check your own transmission fluid. Another interesting owner's manual item that assumes that you are a complete idiot is on page 145, where it says very specifically, do not try to insert plugs into power socket that are not the right size and shape. You know there's some idiot who tried to put a square plug into his power socket, and then the dash shorted out and caught on fire, and he went on social media and said, Ferraris are the worst, I'm never buying them again. And so they put that in there to appeal to the absolute stupidest person they can imagine. A final interesting item in the owner's manual, on page 29, the owner's manual lists the speeds at which you should change gear for the best possible fuel economy. I'm serious, that is a component of a 790 horsepower car's owner's manual. I have to assume that is mandated by the government because no one will ever change gears at that speed. But there it is, in case you wanted to turn your 812 Superfast into an 812 super efficient. One other interesting 812 Superfast item, you know how in most cars with push button starters, if you have the car running and you get out of the car and you've accidentally still got the key fob in your pocket, it'll pop up a little warning that says warning, key fob not detected. Well, in this car, you get out with the engine running and you have the key and oh, that's not incredibly annoying. Thank you, Ferrari, I appreciate that. And so those are all the quirks and features of the 812 Superfast. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the 812. And I have two first impressions. Number one, the transmission is tremendously quick. I've driven some quick dual clutches. This is about the quickest, which is impressive to me because a lot of automakers have said their cars are now making too much power for dual clutches. Well, this thing's making 790 horsepower and it has the quickest dual clutch I've ever felt, one of them. It's really, really impressive. Very good, very quick transmission. It's also surprisingly smooth, not that much getting kicked back. Even at lower speeds, they've managed to make it smooth. The number two thing I've realized, this is a hard-edged, angry car. This is not a Grand Tour, even though it's a front-engine V12 car. This is not your 612, your 456, your GTC4 Lusso. This is a mean car, and it drives like it. I got some open road here. I'm going to open it up. Let's try that again. Wow. Well, that's fast. But the big difference between this and the Chiron was built power well, it was quick, but it was a luxury car, which was to its benefit, I think. But this thing is mean. You can hear it, and it is loud and it feels fast. And that is some of the craziest hard-seeming feeling acceleration that I have felt. Now here I am in traffic because it's LA, and that's all LA is traffic. And actually, I hesitate to say this because earlier I said the ride was really harsh, but actually I feel fine. The roads out here are generally pretty good, and sitting in bumper to bumper, I mean, you would think it would lurch a little. That was my problem with like the McLaren 720S. You felt that car wanted to go faster. It didn't like sitting in bumper to bumper. This thing, actually, I mean, I got my navigation screen in my gauge cluster right down here. I got my speedo on the other side. I got the air on perfectly placed towards me, and I'm just sitting in my Superfast, and it's actually not so bad. All right, let's have a little fun. Wow, God, the steering is so sharp. How do you get sharper than this? The steering is just horrendously sharp, which is not a correct adjective, but I don't care. My God, it's just, the crazy thing is it's so sharp, especially considering this is just a big long-hooded front-engine V12 car. This isn't a mid-engine supercar or anything like that, but it's so darty. I mean, this is a big vehicle. How do they make it so darty? By the way, quick aside, I love putting on the turn signal with my thumbs. Why doesn't everybody do that? That's one of the greatest ideas in the entire history of the car. In the end, this car is quite impressive. Ferrari has managed to make it so that their V12 front-engine cars are now as incredible and fast and crazy as their V8 mid-engine cars, while still retaining sort of the elegance that these cars have always had. The tech is excellent now. It's hard to find any fault with this car except for the fact that it costs $400,000+, and therefore I will never be able to have it. And so that's the 812 Superfast. Ferrari calls it their highest performance regular production car ever. In other words, short of the crazy limited production stuff like the LaFerrari and the Enzo. And it really is an amazing car. Amazing numbers, amazing price, and amazing performance. Some might even call it super fast. Anyway, now it's time for the Doug score.
Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the 812 has a gorgeous profile, but all the gouges and lines make it a bit fussy, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Acceleration does 0 to 60 in 2.7 seconds and easily gets a 10 out of 10. Handling is really good. Steering is incredibly precise, though you can feel a little bit of weight in the front of the car from the long hood. It gets a 9 out of 10. Fun factor is very high, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Cool factor isn't as strong. This car doesn't turn as many heads on account of it being a V12 rather than a mid-engine bright red V8 488. To me, that's a benefit, but it also means you can't show off how cool you are to everyone around, and it gets an 8 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 44 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories, starting with features. It's well equipped, but not incredibly loaded with self-driving stuff or anything, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Comfort is acceptable, a little bit better than a mid-engine exotic like the 488, but not as good as the Chiron, but it's slightly closer to the Chiron than it is to the 488, so it gets a 5 out of 10. Quality is very strong, the interior is beautiful, and materials are wonderful, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Practicality is average, the trunk is bigger than most exotics, but it only has 2 seats, and the load floor is high. Fuel economy is also abysmal, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Finally, there's value. This is insanely fast and thrilling and exciting, but at $400,000, I can't give it anything better than a 6 out of 10, meaning it gets a total weekend score of 28 out of 50. Added up, and the Doug score is 72 out of 100, and that places it just behind the Chiron, tied with the 918 Spider for the second best car I've ever tested. In the weekend categories, it's just as fun as the 488 and the Huracan, but it has a very slight edge in the daily categories, and it finishes up a point ahead overall.